Thank you, Senator Padilla. We'll now start our second round of questions. I'll grant myself time for questions. I'm going to pick up where I left off. My next question is for the entire panel. As we've heard, this is an extremely complex process, and a small breakdown can have large effects on the overall operation. Where do bottlenecks typically occur in the process for each of your organizations? We'll start with Mr. Davies and then move across the panel.
Thank you. I think for OFO at the ports of entry, the biggest bottleneck that we encounter is when it comes to release. And so that's whether the individual is being referred for detention with ERO or being released, as was just mentioned, with the NGOs, making sure that there's a smooth transition and minimal amount of time once we've completed case processing to move those individuals out of our port of entry is imperative for us. That's the biggest bottleneck.
So as far as Border Patrol is concerned, there's a number of bottlenecks that occur throughout the entire immigration enforcement continuum, starting with at encounter. When large groups enter, 400 or 500, sometimes even 1,000, it can create a significant drain on our resources and our personnel to extract those individuals out of the field. So that's probably the first. And to the back end of that, our turning over to other agencies, also post-processing, waiting for available space, waiting for available acceptance is probably our biggest bottlenecks.
Thank you for the question. For ERO, our biggest bottleneck is obtaining travel documents and actually affecting the removal for countries other than Northern Triangle countries.
For USCIS, I think one of our biggest bottlenecks is that this expedited removal process remains a very paper-based process, and each of the three components have their own ways of, their own parts of the credible fear process. We've made great strides in being able to digitize parts of that process and make an electronic environment end-to-end. I think we've overcome a lot of those bottlenecks to that end, and that's a major and a significant accomplishment.
Thank you. Chief Bemiller, I'd like to continue with the discussion on credible fear interviews in Border Patrol custody. How many sectors are currently participating in the program, and if there are plans to expand that to other sectors, how does the policy affect operations in the sectors that do currently conduct those interviews?
Thank you. We have 5 sectors that are currently conducting immigration. Are conducting credible fear interviews, and we have tried to sample those in Del Rio as well. I would say that there is a significant backlog in the time of custody and our tick times, raising the overall tick times for Border Patrol in custody. An average for it averages between 9 and 16 days in custody to completely process them all the way through the CFI process while in Border Patrol custody.
Thank you. Mr. Davies, now that OFO has increased the number of CBP-1 appointments at ports across the southwest border, it can take even longer for migrants to get a walk-in appointment. Of course, that can counterproductively incentivize migrants to cross between ports. So what's the current total number of daily CBP-1 appointments across the southwest border, and how many walk-in appointments are you able to accommodate each day?
So across the 8 ports of entry where we're processing CBP-1 appointments, we intake or schedule on a daily basis 1,450 appointments. In addition to those, both at those same 8 locations and at the other locations that do not accept CBP-1 appointments, we generally, on average, take about 200 other individuals in a day. And the way that happens will vary from port to port. In some cases, when they have completed all of their appointments for the day, they'll bring others in from the line. In some places, it will be throughout the day as capacity allows. They'll bring in individuals who do not have appointments.
Thank you. And Mr. Davies, most migrants that are being processed at ports of entry are making appointments through this app, but there are issues with the app. There are a limited number of languages, which makes it difficult for some groups to access the scheduling system. So when processing walk-in appointments, does OFO ask migrants why they didn't or weren't able to make a CBP1 appointment? And if so, what are the responses that you most commonly are hearing?
So we don't, in a systematic way, require our officers to ask that information or record it in our system of record. We do know anecdotally, because some of our officers do ask that question, that typically the answers we get back are that they either didn't have access to the phone, they may say that they were unaware of the process, or as you pointed out, they will say that there were issues with the language availability in the app itself. So we're aware of some of those shortcomings. We're, to the ones that we have the ability to address, we're working to address with constant updates to the app. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Davidson, from an operational perspective, how has the circumvention of lawful pathways rule affected USCIS's work with migrants apprehended at the southwest border? And has it had any significant reduction in the number of credible fear interviews that the agency is conducting?
Thank you, Senator. It's not had a reduction, it's had an increase in the amount of interviews that have been referred to USCIS since May 12th. And certainly the process to analyze a credible fear case under the CLP, there's more complexities involved, having to analyze exceptions and then the presumption rebuttal. And so that part has added more time to the credible fear process, certainly.
My last question is for the panel. With the end of the fiscal year rapidly approaching, we're hearing more conversations about what happens if Congress can't complete its work of keeping the government funded. How would a government shutdown affect each of your components' abilities to make sure that the management border systems are functioning? And we'll start with Mr. Davies and move across the panel.
Thank you. I think the biggest impact that a government shutdown would have on the Office of Field Operations would be the morale of our workforce, because as we know through previous government shutdowns, we would continue coming to work and securing our border at our ports of entry. But for officers, especially over a prolonged period of time, not having a paycheck to go home to is extremely demoralizing and debilitating for our officers that many of them may live paycheck to paycheck and in places where there are high costs of living. And so that to me would be the biggest concern. You know, we had during the last government shutdown to go through this process of allowing many of our officers to seek outside employment. I think that's a dangerous precedent to set, having officers working a second job somewhere else just to try to make money. Well, they should be focused on our primary law enforcement missions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd now recognize Senator Langford for